Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, Mr. Fused Fiction Hub, bringing you another amazing story. This is the story, 2 Feet Short by Garrett Wellist. Chapter 1. The first indication that Toshinori's life took a strange turn, was when he woke up feeling nothing. On a typical morning, his left side would ache long after he took his medications. The taste of iron strong on his tongue and aches in every joint he had. Everything popped back into place as he walked to his kitchen for tea and what little breakfast he could have. The fact that he was not only waking up without the constant aches and pains, but also felt well rested, was a complete surprise. Maybe the world had decided to finally kill him? He couldn't focus too heavily on that train of thought before he started noticing other things that were just as wrong. His feet were warm. His blankets usually just missed covering the tops of his feet once stretched out fully. Now, his legs were fully extended but his toes were a far ways away from the end of the blanket. They were quite a distance from the end of the bed as well. He sat up slowly, scared of what may be causing this new, strange comfort. He saw almost everything else that was wrong. His feet made smaller lumps in his blankets than they typically did. Not a single joint popped. And he had the smallest pair of hands he'd seen on a 52-year-old man, let alone one of his size. That was where Toshinori started panicking. Ripping the sheets away from his now tiny form, he jumped out of bed and bolted to the bathroom. It took twice the number of steps to get there as per usual. It was a similar experience to the old cartoons he'd watch as a child. The protagonist would drink some kind of green licensure and the world change around their very being, everything slowly getting bigger, taller. It was too overwhelming to focus on. Once inside of the bathroom, he just barely saw from his neck and up through the mirror hung high up on the wall, but that was all he needed to see. His unruly blonde hair was now the slightest bit more tame. His long bangs were shorter and straighter. His hair looked less damaged and greasy and more fluffy. His face was void of wrinkles and the dark bags under his eyes were gone. His face held life, youth even. His cheeks were full, eyes no longer sunken in, jaw a more round shape, and his profound height almost cut in half. The panic that boiled in his now existent stomach rose to his heart and up his throat, into the sink and down the drain. The scream he felt crawl out of his throat did nothing to ease his dread. Toshinori called Nezu the moment he was calm enough to think rationally. He was still near hyperventilating and the nausea from before seemed to return. He almost missed the cheerful tone of Nezu answering his call. "All might, what can I do for you this fine morning?" Nezu's calm tone calmed his bubbling dread, if only marginally. "Nezu, I don't know what happened. I'm young and I can't see myself and Thimmer what's wrong with my." His heart beat against his chest painfully. "Please calm down. Panicking will help neither of us. Now, take a deep breathe and start again." The pro hero stopped, struggled to release his deep breath and started over. "Nezu, I'm short and I don't know what to do." It was surprising how well he hid the tremor in his throat. "Short, you say? I ask you to stay where you are. I'd hate for the media to catch word of your predicament and broadcast it over all of Japan. I will send someone to you." Toshinori's phone beeped, announcing that Nezu had hung up. He took another few minutes to stand up from his bedroom floor and looked through his clothes for something, anything to wear. His clothes were already too big on him as an adult. It would be only worse as ... whatever he was now. He chose the smallest shirt he owned, which was still outrageously large on him, and wore his boxers as shorts. Once dressed, Toshinori padded into his kitchen in hopes to ease to nausea. When he had moved into the quiet neighborhood, he had to remodel the entire house to fit his height. The windows, cabinets, counters, and even roof had been moved an extra 2 feet up. That change did no favors for his shorter form now. Opening a lower cupboard, he climbed up the counter and looked at his tall kitchen from the new viewpoint. He could easily reach the bread on top of the fridge and any dishes he wished to use. He opened the cupboard holding his many jars of rice and a few cans of soup. As the blonde reached for a can, his stomach twisted with a strong wave of nausea and he gagged. It made sense for him to be this hungry, having been without the organ for 6 years now. Once the wave passed, leaving him feeling empty, he tried for the can again and gathered a few bags of rice as well. Now to get down a broken bar setting down his pre-made breakfast, he turned around on his knees very slowly, facing toward the dark wood cabinet and slowly lowered a single leg down to the floor. It didn't reach. He stretched it further but still felt nothing. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed hold of the shelf in front of him and slowly lowered his other foot, the edge of the counter pressing against his sensitive abdomen. Just as Toshinori was ready to slide a bit lower, his fingers slipping from the wood and he fell the rest of the way down, landing with a sharp jolt, on his back. The air was pushed from his lungs, and he struggled to stay calm, not gasping for another breath. Once his lungs started to function again, he sat up slowly, rubbing at the stinging pain on his back and tailbone. He was only grateful his head didn't hit quite as hard. Slowly getting to his feet, Another wave of nausea hit him and he held his twitching stomach in an attempt to keep from spilling bile over his tile floors. The wave passed quicker than the last and he stood up straight. He retrieved a small pot and struggled to hold it steady after filling it with water and rice. He set it onto the stove and could barely reach the knob to turn it on. Toshinori let out a long sigh and sat on the cold floor of his kitchen. Breakfast never took quite that much work before. Deciding to find any other changes that may have sprung onto him in his panic, he checks over himself. His arms and legs were less bony and ill-looking, holding his natural tan. His legs were covered in short, blonde hair and his toes were no longer pale and dead. They were actually quite soft. His hands were beautiful and young. His middle finger was no longer crooked and his hands held no scars. Even his hard-earned calluses were replaced with smooth skin. Slowly lifting up his baggy shirt, he touched his left side, which held no scar. It was all smooth skin. His ribs were no longer threatening to break, the skin pulled tight around them and his stomach poked out in a naturally healthy way, the way a young child would. Toshinori felt tears sting the back of his eyes. His body was so perfect. Refusing to let the tears run, he stood up and hesitated before peeking into his large boxers. With the snap of his elastic, he could safely say he was a preteen. It was strange how the realization settled his nerves. The now younger blonde was pulled from his thoughts by the rice boiling over. He quickly blew the bubbles away and turned down the temperature, adding his simple cream soup to the sticky rice and paused before realizing he still needed a bowl. With a sigh, he turned off the stove, almost burning his elbow over the used burner, and slowly climbed back up onto the counter. The bowls were in a higher shelf. He slowly got to his feet, weary of the edge of his marble counter, and reached for a smaller bowl and a pair of chopsticks. He slowly crouched down, placing the utensils and dish onto the side of the stove, and took the risk of jumping down. A jolt shot through his legs, but he recovered quickly. Turning back to the stove, he served himself and placed the used pot into the high sink. He took his bowl in both hands and padded to the couch to avoid the large chairs. Toshinori was halfway through his bowl before he heard a knock on his front door. He debated between leaving Nezu, or whoever he had sent, outside as he finished his breakfast, but thought better of it. He still had to be polite, even in the stress of his situation. The blonde steeled himself and slowly walked to the front door. It was strange, not having to bend down to avoid hitting his head. It was almost nice, being a smaller size. Almost two familiar men stood just outside of his door. He talked with President Mick often, whether about his lack of skills in computers, lesson planning or just teaching in general. He was always so kind, willing to help the poor old man. He was close enough to the school DJ to consider him a friend. Eraserhead, on the other hand, was a much more prickly person and hid nothing about his opinion. He had known the man disliked him from the first day. He had, however, whether in kindness or duty, helped him plan his first month's worth of classes and seemed to glare at him a bit less after his run-in with All for One. It made visiting 20 different sets of parents more bearable. President Mick's expression was a mix of awe and horror. It made sense. Yo, Cho, I think All Might has a key to Broken Bar. Aizawa hid his surprise better, but it was a far cry from his usual serious self. What's going on here? Nezu never said anything about a broken bar. His hand gestured generally to Toshinori. Both spoke as if he was deaf, which was quite rude. So Nezu sent you too? He gave what he hoped was a kind smile. The two guests looked at him for a few seconds before Yamada nodded enthusiastically. Could you get Yagi Toshinori for us? Little listener. He shot some finger guns. I am Yagi Toshinori. He really didn't look that different, did he? His voice was still fairly low for someone his age. Or his new age. Aizawa sighed. You might not be coming back here for a while, so take a backpack of anything you may need. Toshinori nodded slowly, hoping he wouldn't stay at overnight. He had a hard enough time getting sleep as it was. Oh, I forgot to invite you in. Please make yourselves comfortable. He ran back to the couch and shoveled the rest of his food into his mouth before discarding it into the sink. Still chewing, he set some water to boil with less effort than breakfast took and ran into his room to pack. He didn't care to gather clothes that wouldn't fit him, so he took an extra pair of socks he didn't need to look to know his shoes wouldn't fit and shoved a few medicine bottles into his old backpack just in case. He took his teaching ID, wallet and a small blanket given to him from a fan who seemed to underestimate his height. Now ready for anything that would come for him, Toshinori pulled on his backpack and headed back to the kitchen just in time to stop the dreaded whistle of the kettle. Yamada offered help with his stove, but it was turned away quickly. They were still his guests, and guests didn't do chores. Holding 3 mugs was a bit more of a challenge than he last remembered it being, but managed without spilling a drop of coffee or tea. He settled down opposite to Yamada and Aizawa, relieved to finally taste his beloved green tea. Thanks for the coffee, little listener. The machine in the teacher's lounge managed to break again, and let me tell ya, driving around with an uncaffeinated shouta is rough. The speaker hero's laugh was contagious, making Toshinori feel light for the first time that morning. Can we leave now? The coffee didn't seem to do much for Aizawa's mood. Toshinori looked at his socked feet, rubbing them together, and nodded nervously. Typically, This kind of anxiety was easily replaced with a smile, but the muscles in his face felt harder to pull upward. It made his heart ache when he tried. Stupid hormones. Let's get going then. It'll be fun. You won't have to worry about coughing blood or any of that stuff. Yamada's attempts at cheering him up almost worked. Had the younger boy's mind not automatically contradicted each comment. Scooting off the couch, Toshinori followed the older men into a black car with the symbol embroidered across the hood. He sat himself in the back seat, alone. Yamada was the one to drive and they made it to the school fairly quickly. The blonde only became self-conscious of his improv outfit once he saw the students slowly making their way from the dorms to the main building. The instinct to hide pressed against his mind, but he pushed back just as hard. He was not scared and would not hide from a couple of students. With a smile spread across his face and hands gripping the thick straps of his backpack, Toshinori marched toward. Thanks for listening to this tale. Make sure you comment, like and subscribe and have a wonderful day.